Hello, listeners, and welcome to Pop Screen, part of the Geek Show Podcast Network. We are that corner of the Geek Show that likes to deal with the good, the bad, and the bewildering of movies, either starring, about, or by pop stars. No, the podcast covers such a broad range of musical and cinematic genres, from country and western to hip-hop, from documentaries to science fiction. I'm your host, Graham Williamson. I'm a filmmaker and regular columnist for thegeekshow.co.uk and Horrified, the British horror website. I've been joined this week by...
Ewan Gledo, hello.
Hello there. Where can people find you, Ewan?
You've caught me off guard there because I've usually got a list open. You can find me on cult following, Clapper, Geek Show, Narc Magazine, Any Volume, Newcastle World, Daily Star, Twitter and Letterboxd as well. I keep forgetting to plug that. You can get me on there.
True. Yes.
Ewan Gledo, EWANGLEADOW. And I tend to do most of my shit posting on there, so that's the best place to reach me.
Most of your shit posting on either Letterboxd or this podcast.
Yeah, pretty much. It's I like appearing on these things because I feel like I've got free reign, where elsewhere I don't really have. I've got like professional litmus tests to sort of jump hoops through. But here I can just be myself, which is tiring for some.
we have absolutely no interest in professionalism at all around here.
Oh,
so
no. I mean, I'm wearing a blazer, but that's because it's a bit cold today.
Well, I thought it was a themed blazer. I thought it was a conceptual blazer.
I wish I could dress as well as Jarvis Cocker. I really do. I've got the glasses for it, but
yes,
close
listeners.
enough.
This week, we are dealing with the work of perennial greatest living Englishman candidate Jarvis Cocker, former frontman of the band Pulp, now in Jarvis. And there's more of a screen CV. There are more Cocker-related movies and TV shows than I think people might think. There is Pulp, a film about life, death, and supermarkets, which you've just been on... What was it?
Death by Adaptation,
yes.
Where I got to talk about Life, Death and Supermarkets and then Mother, Brother, Lover, which has just such a lovely rule of three.
Yes.
Oh, amazing. Mother, Brother, Lover, nothing better. And then I've got this hefty bugger as well.
Pop, a pun which I only recently got.
It's very nice. It's if you drop this on someone's head, it's going to deal damage. But it's going to remain on the shelf for the time being until I find a good salesman on eBay to sell a signed copy to.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It's my pride and joy. Sleep with it under my pillow every night, just in case.
But that, in terms of other Cocker-related films, I mean, he's worked with Wes Anderson twice. On Fantastic Mr. Fox and The French Dispatch.
Yeah.
He was in one of the Harry Potter films, wasn't
he? Was in Goblet of Fire as, I'm not even going to bother trying to remember the name because I've erased that from my memory, but I do know it was it Steve Mackey was with him as well.
On
bass, and I think there was a member of Radiohead there.
Yeah, I think Johnny Greenwood's in there.
Johnny Greenwood's in it as well. Yeah. Kind of strange that that's sort of the launch pad for him working with Paul Thomas Anderson on all these great films.
Yeah.
That's his foot in the door.
I might have forgotten it if it wasn't for the fact that someone does have a list on Letterboxd for films where Johnny Greenwood appears on the soundtrack, and it is like There Will Be Blood and The Power of the Dog and Norwegian Wood, and that one Harry Potter film where he was in the band at some Hogwarts school dance.
What was that? Do the Hippogriff. Oh, God.
That was it, yes.
That was... I remember that was the first Harry Potter I saw in cinemas. That was I'll have been 7 at the time.
Was it because of the Jarvis Cocker cameo?
I wish, but I didn't know who Jarvis Cocker was until about 17. So a good 10 years before I knew who he was, I was already seeing the man on the big screen.
Yeah.
Fantastic. He's everywhere. He was definitely everywhere in kind of British culture over the past few years as well. He keeps appearing on like Bargain Hunt and stuff.
Yes. Yeah, it's quite a range of appearances for a man who, unless I'm misreading the articles, a man who lives in a cave now. That's a bit odd. Why does he do that?
It's something about the acoustics, I believe. there's some real mystifying quality to recording a whole live set in a cavern in, I think it was the Peak District, and then just subsequently removing it from the internet and just releasing one song. A very good set though. Yeah, he's onto this whole not environmentalist. I mean, he is as well, because he did that sound dub with Riton, who's a DJ, and they did an environmental dubstep type thing. I don't think dubstep's the right word, but it was like very bouncy. Not my cup of tea, but it was very environmentally charged. And I suppose the big cave thing at the moment, sort of following that suit.
There's a kind of nature writing quality to it, isn't it? It's very Robert McFarlane.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I mean, I think it was. Is it this? I think the double spread of this. Yeah, the double spread of Beyond the Pale's just caves.
Yes.
Which didn't make much sense, but you do your job. Not bother that. Obviously, strange fella.
But no, we are going a bit further back in his career to a time, I would say, just after his Britpop peak, just after he'd been briefly ubiquitous thanks to the 1996 pulp album Different Class, and when, by his own admission, he was at serious risk of becoming Britain's premier Jarvis Cocker impersonator.
Was it around this period that he was going to stuff like the Action Man premiere and essentially appearing on every show he could get his hands on?
Yes. And I think part of that is sort of logical, because part of the reason why pulp came up as sort of pop stars after a very long period of slogging away on indie labels, and part of that was because Britpop was happening and the prevailing winds were at their back in a way that they hadn't been in the 80s. But part of it was also because Jarvis Cocker knew that part of the joy of following a pop star as a fan is seeing them pop up on any old mad shit and briefly sort of bending the ceremonies to their advantage. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think he took it to the extreme, especially even after the post Different Class phase, which, you know, like the documentary we're going to talk about, is, I feel like that's one of the main reasons behind it. Channel 4's gone to him and said, "You're quite prolific in the field of everything at the moment. Would you like to come and do a documentary for us?" And being the opportunist he is, absolutely, yeah, of course. I think it would always appear on like game shows and stuff, and he still does a little bit. He did Catchphrase a couple of years ago.
Did he?
Yeah, he did the Stephen Mulhern one. And I always get because my friends know I'm a huge fan. I'll always get a text saying something like, "Oh, you've seen Ward Jarvis on telly." It's like, "Oh, that'd be brilliant." Well, I don't watch TV. I know I own a TV there, but it doesn't have like satellites in it. That's just so I can watch still game from my bed. That's you know. But it's really warm. Like it heats up immediately. It's like a sauna. But
right.
It's fantastic. It's like heating without the heat. It's unbelievable. But yeah, he's on everything, isn't he? Or he was for a period, and then it kind of not diminished, but it was an active step away of like, I don't need to do this anymore.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where if you're on the way up, there's an obvious utility to appearing on anything. And if you're in your, what the Pet Shop Boys called post-imperial phase, you know, it can be kind of fun to turn up on Catchphrase and Bargain Hunt and have everyone go, "That's Jarvis Cocker." There's a certain sort of innocent fun to that. And when you're actually a big star, appearing on random shit just looks tacky. You know, it just makes people sick of you.
Yeah, at some point it capsizes. I think the best example of that's probably Bono, who now whenever he appears, everyone goes, "Oh, not Bono," despite the fact that you two are quite good. And it's there are certain artists, and for me it's like Liam Gallagher. Just seeing them pop up, it's like, you know what you're going to get, you know, the rigmarole, this is what they do. And it's like you said earlier, it becomes a caricature of itself. I can't think of many artists that have like a fine line between appearing just the right amount and also maintaining that credibility of consistently where it's, oh, look who it is. Maybe Johnny Marr or someone like that, as in when he did that quick set with the Killers at Glastonbury. Or
Even
ironically, Pet Shop Boys
even
were there
Johnny
as well.
Marr, I think,
Yeah.
has to be saved from himself. I mean, it's the one plus side to BBC4 having its budget cut back and back is that there was a time when every single new music documentary on BBC4 had an interview with Johnny Marr in the same pub every single week. And it's, you know, as much goodwill as there is in my heart for Johnny Marr, and there is a lot, but
Yeah.
he needs to have someone say, you know, you don't need to do a talking head for every single band.
No, absolutely not. And I think I think we're going to head into a big period where documentaries are doing that more often. But I remember there was one Britpop documentary called Live Forever, which was
Yeah.
essentially collect all of the Britpop figureheads. You've got the Gallagher brothers, Damon Albarn, and Jarvis Cocker, and have them say absolutely nothing of interest for an hour and a half. And it was just so strange. I think I watched it when I had a fever, so it didn't make sense anyway. But
that was in like about, I remember that coming out, that was in like about 2003, 2002,
yeah.
which is far too close to have any sort of interesting
Yeah.
perspective on what happened. And I think the only person I can imagine being interested in that is Jarvis, who seemed to have perspective on his period as a massive pop star. As soon as it happened, he seemed to understand the sort of pitfalls of it immediately.
Do you think a lot of that came from how long he spent trying to become a pop star?
I
Because
think
he
it
had
did, yeah. Like, as smart
4
as he is,
albums.
I don't think that if 20-something Jarvis had been as big as 30-something Jarvis, I don't think he would have released This Is Hardcore. I
Oh,
don't think he
absolutely
could
not.
have had that sort of wisdom about it.
No, absolutely not. And I think I should just say, I don't know what you think, but I'm still tossing up the debate between is the best pulp album This Is Hardcore a different class. I've got a hardcore shirt on now, but
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't
I
know
mean, they're
anymore.
both fantastic, but may I
Yeah.
cut the Gordian knot here and
Oh,
say Wheel of Life?
really? What
Yeah.
the? You know what? I would, but I cannot stand the trees. I just, it's like it's like nothing but flowers from Talking Heads, but without the sustenance. It's
Right.
But I do have a soft spot for Wheel of Life because Sunrise is incredible and Bad
Yeah.
Cover Version just oozes that Scott Walker production influence. It's
Yes.
and there's the amount of like undercurrent hits on there, like The Night That Minnie Timperley Died
Great
and Wicker
song.
Man.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
It's also got like a lot of his best lyrics, I think. And if I ever want to sell someone on the idea of Jarvis Cocker as a great lyricist, rather than go to common people, which they will probably have heard already and may not have paid much attention to, I will point out that that Wicker Man contains the lyric, "Beneath the old tree bore factory that burned down in the early 70s, leaving an antiquated sweet shop smell and caverns of nougat and caramel." I mean, fucking hell.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
No need to be that good for that many years. Like
Yeah.
even now, I think Swanky Modes he didn't. Me and you've spoken about Beyond the Pale before, and I wasn't really that big a fan of it. I truly, hand on heart, it's probably in my top 10 of all time. Now that I've had the chance to re-listen to it, I love that album.
Yeah.
It's phenomenal, and I couldn't get enough of it. And I remember listening. I have had the absolute luxury and pleasure of hearing Swanky Modes live.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Like the lyrics in that song are just. It is the smartest writing I've heard him do since the start of his career. That it's on that level of just speechless for how good it was.
I mean, Swanky Mode's name checks Teesside, so it's obviously got a place in my heart.
Yeah, I mean, he changed it to Tyneside when he performed it up here. So I don't know how you feel about that.
That's fine. I'm a fan of regionalism in pop music. I remember seeing them.
Yeah.
I saw the Manic Street Preachers when they were touring This Is My Truth, Tell Me Yours, and James Dean Bradfield gave the crowd the permission to sing along to Tsunami as if it was Toonami. He said, you know, we won't mind if you change the lyrics.
It's brilliant. And I think the modern equivalent of that is Sam Fender, who's essentially inherited the Newcastle spirit and just gone off and said, look at the culture we've got up here. It's better than yours. Sing along. It's just fantastic. Yeah. Unbelievable. But yeah.
But we're talking about this is quite a good sort of way in, isn't it? 'Cause we're talking about all these little small byways and places outside of the mainstream where culture can congregate and gather its strength before going onto the national stage. And that is, in a great sense, what the mini series we are reviewing today is about. We are reviewing Journeys into the Outside with Jarvis Cocker, a 1999 three-part documentary by Jarvis Cocker and Martin Wallace, his friend, the video artist, where he goes around various locations all around the world looking at environments created by, and this is a I mean, what's the terminology? They're artists who haven't had formal training, is the thing.
There is a word for that. Amateur art? No.
They call it, around here we call it outsider art. In France, it's art brut, which literally means raw art.
I do prefer that. That's stunning.
Outsider art it's a bit of a tricky statement because it's like the series doesn't dwell on this, and I think it's right not to dwell on this, but you can look back through the history of actual capital A proper art and say, all right, well, Richard Dad was institutionalized, Vincent van Gogh was mentally ill, William Blake had hallucinations. If they were around after Freudianism, would they get the chance to be part of the artistic canon, or would they be outsider art? And it's difficult. It's quite, there's something quite snobbish about saying, if you don't go to an art school, as Jarvis Cocker did, as anyone who's heard the opening verse of Common People will know, then you can't be like a proper artist, no matter how good you are. You can only be the best outsider artist.
Yeah, it's such a. I think it's kind of. I'm just riffing on. I've just finished reading Andy Warhol's Popism, and he essentially ended that with he was no longer a pop artist because it had grown past him, and I think it's because genres are so malleable. They're always in this state of just redefining itself, and I think for a period you're going to have outsider art as this specific group of people. These artists fit in. And it's not until you realize what a sort of arbitrary genre it is that everybody could probably fit in that had the circumstances been right or gone the other way. There are artists in the past, like anybody could fit in. Ralph Steadman could fit in had the circumstances changed because that art is so unique to him and it's not really been replicated by anyone else. And I think the real connection with all the artists in Journeys to the Outside is they're all a bit weird, which is wonderful. It was really just quite a pleasure seeing all these. Often it was architecture, a lot of just unique world building on their own property. Which is delightful.
He narrows it down a bit to what interests him, which is specifically this idea of the visionary environment. Of course, there are outsider artists who paint and who sculpt and who make video pieces, probably. But what seems to interest Jarvis Cocker is this idea of artists who refashion the place where they live to be a part of their imagination.
Yeah, I've done that in my room. I live in a hellscape, but I think it for me it's like the outsider art scene there where it was like essentially it was clutter made to look unique. It was a lot of stuff where if you walk down the street you'd think, oh, what's that, and then you get close, it's like that's someone's house and they've plastered it with beer cans or like bottles, and it's really inventive. And I do like that aspect of it where it is just kind of a big build of just shit that looks really good. I think the best example is when he heads to India and all the statues are stood in the formation, and it looks brilliant. But I can't imagine seeing that, down the road. I can't imagine seeing any of the art that he explores here, like in my area. But it's amazing to see that it is kind of just art in plain sight. It's just there. It's part of the street. It's part of the culture of the city or the town that it's in. and it just looks marvelous. It just sets
Yeah.
itself out.
Yeah, one of the most remarkable pieces of it for this reason is when he goes to see the Watts Towers in Los Angeles, which were built by an Italian immigrant called Simon Rodier. And a lot of them are immigrants, which I think is interesting. I guess it's that kind of impulse when you're in an unfamiliar country to create something that feels like home, even in this extreme version. But there's footage of the Watts Towers, which are enormous constructions, but they exist in a completely ordinary neighborhood. You've just got standard, like 1960s prefab built houses with these massive, like cathedral-like spires sticking up
It's
behind
amazing.
them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the equivalent we've got in my town is that there's a viewing tower next to a castle, but the viewing tower doesn't look like it's finished. It looks like a Gillette razor blade stood on its fucking side. And what's essentially happened is that people have built this and thought, yes, we can look over the landscapes, having had the foresight not to build it taller than the houses it's trying to look over. Makes it a bit difficult. And it just looks like a really strange modern art installation around very, not rustic, but shit houses. And it just kind of looks lots of nice old brickwork, really nice refurbished streets, massive Gillette razor. Just sticks out like a sore thumb. And I thought about that a lot, especially in the first episode, where it's kind of bric-a-brac structures that do look unique and they do look a bit odd. But the real key to them is that they don't seem all out of place.
Yeah.
And it's so strange to see, a house covered with the side of it that looks like a rock formation, but it's actually like pebbles and bottles and stuff. And for having that to look normal, it's bizarre.
There isn't very much of this kind of thing in Britain. We do have outsider artists, but they tend not to get involved in architecture or anything. I think the nearest example I can think of is, have you ever heard of the Headington Shark?
I've not, but I do like sharks.
Maybe we should just take a second for you to put that into Google Images, because
I'm
not sure I can describe it in a way that does it justice.
Headington shit.
Yes.
Oh, yes. See, I love stuff like that. Just stuff that'll make people go, one, no, everybody knows that sharks, natural habitat is the ocean. But I think even knowing that and the logical sense of it, seeing it stick out the side of the house, even for a moment, it's like, oh my God, there's a shark trying to get into that house. That's brilliant.
There's a wonderful hint of Eli Cash in the Royal Tenenbaums in how you describe this. Everyone knows that a shark's natural habitat is in the ocean, but what this work presupposes is maybe it's in the roof of a house.
Is that every shark has a home. The equivalent I can think of is, have you ever been to the Metro Centre in
in Newcastle?
I don't know if it's still there. I know the Metro Centre's still there, but I don't know if there used to be a car heading out of the wall. And that's normal. I've seen loads of places do that. But the issue with this one is that it looked like it was actually going to snap off, because that much of the car was actually facing out of like a brickwork wall where it's like, oh yeah, the car's exploding through. But it really does look like a gust of wind's going to take it down. And it was just so unnerving to be like 6 years old and walking under it. It was just, but I think, the Headington Shark's beautiful.
Fabulous, isn't it?
That's amazing. Yeah. The only like proper art I've seen a Banksy before in Hull, and I think we painted over it or something like that, but it's not there anymore. I think that's the only art I've seen in the outside world. I've seen Temple Bar in Dublin. That's no art is worth £8 a pint, but God. We had a Spanish gallery open recently, and they couldn't afford to ship the actual exhibits over, so they've printed 3D models of the exhibits, which are actually currently still in Spain. So you are free to just wander in, pick up the exhibits, and like throw them around because they're just 3D prints and then get another one. It's bizarre.
Future of museums, isn't it? I would definitely go to more museums if there was a possibility that you could just sort of dick around and play catch with an ancient Etruscan vase.
Well, that's the thing. There used to be the Durham Light Infantry Museum, and they shut that down years ago. but there was a massive World War I tank, and there was a very clear sign that said, "Do not climb in the tank." So me and my friends thought, well, that's clearly just for adults. So we climbed in, and I got stuck in the front of the war tank. And I
you could have made demands.
I could have, yeah.
You could have said, you know, I'll activate this if you don't give me this.
I could have restarted World War One from the comfort of Durham. Brilliant. I wish I had. But what it did do, and I think what I've so from being just in museums and around like art and then watching Journeys into the Outside, it's kind of rekindled something in my brain that's like, I've got to go and see more of this stuff. I actually almost ordered an Andy Warhol print as soon as I'd finished watching this. I was going to get the 4 bananas. But
it's hard not to feel carried away by it, isn't it? Because it's again that kind of Alice in Wonderland quality of walking around in a completely normal place and suddenly finding this dreamed environment.
Yeah,
is very seductive.
The closest we've got in the Northeast is like you spot a HMV and see a 2-for-1 sale. That's like the equivalent. But no, this is a very Channel 4 documentary. This is like it, 10:30, just after the football's finished.
Yeah.
Nice and comfortable. You got a blanket, you got your cup of tea. It's like that level of documentary. And I think with or without Cocker in it, it's just so comfortable.
Yeah.
Because you're learning stuff passively. You're just picking up little bits and pieces. And it's nice to be fed information without really knowing it.
And it's such a visual sort of thing to be making. I mean, the danger with a lot of arts documentaries is that the older the art gets, the less you can do with it. You can show an interview with a living artist, but when it's Raphael or one of the other Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, you've just got like a painting to close in on. But here you've got whole buildings, whole castles, whole parks that you can explore. And there's some amazing ones. I mean, Coral Castle, I think, was a particular favorite where no one can quite work out how it was engineered.
Yeah, it's it's fascinating. It's a lot of this is mainly, why would anybody make this?
Yeah.
And just to throw it back to Andy Warhol, it does remind me of that sort of underground art a little bit, where people were just making stuff because they found it beautiful or interesting. Whether or not it appealed to most other people didn't really matter.
Yeah.
I always think of Empire, the 8-hour documentary. Yeah. And I remember really hating it when I watched it. You watch about 10 minutes of it and think, what the fuck is this? And then actually reading up on that Velvet Underground scene and that stuff, and you kind of appreciate it a little more. So I think at the bit,
there's an equivalent of that in here, isn't there?
There is, yeah.
Roger Showmore, who made a 20-hour film called Spiritual Disembarkation.
Yeah.
I checked it out. It's not on Letterboxd, sadly.
Unfortunately, I can't watch it then. I only watch things that are on Letterboxd these days. That's probably sums up the documentary itself quite nicely, though, is that you've got some very outsider art. It's a very niche subject, and it's very proper, really. It's quite formal in a way to be experiencing this. But the equivalent is that to engage with that, you're watching a Britpop icon with a fuzzy hat yelling, Monsieur Chomo, like a fence with a port in his hand and a carrier bag in the other. And it's like, that's the perfect documentarian. If David Attenborough dressed like that, I'd watch more of his stuff.
Yeah, Jarvis does make a good account of himself as the Britpop Nick Broomfield in this, I think.
He
man who constantly just goes everywhere and gets locked out of buildings wherever he goes.
He's like Mr. Magoo, but as a documentarian. He's just kind of bumbling about. It's like, I think I've insulted him. I don't really know. It's fantastic.
Well, many of them, because as you say, they're all odd people. Many of them are very easy to insult. I mean, Showmore refuses to participate in the documentary because he says he will not be a part of what he describes as fuckwit cinema.
It's, I don't think it helps that essentially Cocker, who's quite gangly and has this 5 o'clock shadow for the whole thing, is asking very vague questions in broken German or French, and then is trying to translate that back in his head to, I think I've upset them, I'm not quite sure. And then it's just an escalation of real hesitancy between interviewer and interviewee, and it's fantastic.
But the other one he offends is Robert Garcia, who has a sort of what he calls an apocalypse building, which is there to explain his philosophy of the world and its history. A philosophy that, as far as I could tell, is basically just what if the Silurian episodes of Doctor Who really happened. But he is really prickly and calls Cocker an imbecile for thinking that apocalypse means the end of the world.
It's, you know what? We all make assumptions about words, but I think apocalypse is fairly grounded in the end of the world.
Yes.
It doesn't have any other connotations unless it's like an X-Men movie.
It's like, yeah, Bill Callahan's best album and the end of the world is all it means to me.
It's, yeah, I think that's always the danger though with interviewing artists who are very outsider, essentially, is that only they can understand their work.
Yeah,
only they
absolutely.
have the correct interpretation, and they're not going to tell anyone. And I find that both horrifically annoying but also fantastic, and really I appreciate it quite a lot, where it's the David Lynch effect of, oh, actually Eraserhead's my most poetic and thematic film, explain that. No. And
yes,
it's trying to build intrigue about something that does already have intrigue, and it just, the conversation then turns to the artist, and then it just builds from there. And it's really delightful. It's just such a nice flow.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's one of those things where if you're making art that's designed to be seen and appreciated by people, you have to at some point become comfortable with people making their own interpretations. But none of these people have done that. These are people who make art purely for themselves, often for themselves to live in. So the idea that, like, Jarvis Cocker can come in and go, what it means to me is, no, it means this. I made it. I know what it means.
Hello, I wrote a song about hiding in a wardrobe. I'm here to tell you what your art means. Fantastic. Really, for 3 episodes, we've paid a lengthy price. I think it's clear that what drives this documentary is that he's passionate about the art he's exploring, which I think is the baseline for any documentary. It's why I like Louis Theroux so much, which is essentially the broadest example I can think of, where he's looking at these subjects not because they've got mass appeal or because there are a lot of people involved with them, but because it's interesting.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of documentarianism, it essentially boils down to people are going out to find interesting things in the hopes that others will find it interesting as well.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're going to cover, say, like the most hated family in America, for instance, you've got a sort of reason, well, I find this interesting. Other people are going to find it interesting for this reason.
Yeah.
And I think the big appeal of outsider art is that there is so little really trying to document it. I think Journeys into the Outside is probably one of the few that I've heard of that's actually trying to engage with people that really don't want anything to do with people.
Yeah. I can think of like films about individual outsider artists, but I'm trying to think of another like TV work about outsider art as a field, and I just cannot. I don't think anyone else has done it.
The only documentaries I can think of in my very shuttered mind is there's a couple on Banksy, there's one on Ralph Steadman, and there's that Vincent van Gogh one with Chris O'Dowd. Loving Vincent. That's not even a documentary.
Yeah. No. I mean, in terms of documentary stuff, like I can think of, there have been films about people like Henry Darger or Daniel Johnson who are outsider artists. But that's not quite what this is. And I think it would probably not hang together if it didn't have that element you mentioned of this very fanish presenter who is, saying, I'll show you why this is great.
Yeah. And it's, oddly enough, that's why I not dislike, but I think it's the reason I think Life, Death, and Supermarkets, the Pulp documentary doesn't work, is that a lot of it is the director Florian Habic going, "Isn't Pulp amazing? Look at this, and then he sort of doesn't get the point.
Yeah, the Habic documentary, I remember seeing when it first came out, and like you, I think it would be too harsh to say it doesn't work, but it's not what I wanted it to be. And I think part of it's because it came out at that time where there seemed to be a constant flow of music documentaries and bands about it. Like any band with a big enough cult following would get a film made about them. It still happens to some extent. But I think there were a lot of people who seemed to take that as a spur to make something where they could say, it's not just a normal music documentary. And throughout all of the bits with like Pulp fans and things like that, I was thinking, I could have actually gone for a straight documentary about Pulp. I think their story is interesting enough and they are eloquent enough to make that worth watching, you know?
Without a doubt, yeah. It's a weird blend between, it kind of wants to be a concert film, it kind of wants to be a documentary on Sheffield, it kind of wants to be a Pulp documentary, and it's kind of nothing. Like, I do enjoy it, but the last time I watched it, I think it's just bad circumstances. Domino's mugged up my order, spilled a can of lemonade on myself, and it just wasn't very good.
Tragedy.
So it's the big triple.
Yeah.
I remember, I think a lot of Pulp and Jarvis Cocker I remember from uni, because that's when I like really got into them. The first vinyl I ever bought was Different Class, and my flatmates, I know they won't listen to this, but they fucking hate me for. I still speak to a couple of them, but they're like, every time, and they're the same people that text us like, "Oh, Cocker's on the telly," because I would just blast This Is Hardcore and Different Class as the sort of pre-drinks music. I remember the very first night I had in my first year flat, I had an iPod and I was the only one that had a speaker. Therefore, my speaker, my music, and the only albums I had on the iPod were the Mamma Mia soundtrack, sung by Colin Firth and the other various cast
Pierce
members.
Brosnan, the chanters.
And Pierce Brosnan,
Pierce Brosnan,
the man himself. And the only other album I had was Pulp's Gift Recordings, which is like just before. So we're all sat around listening to like "Oh You Gone Gone," and it's like we're off to see Tom Zanetti at a nightclub, and it's like just such a different mood when you go and see a DJ, and you've spent 20 minutes listening to Sheffield Sex City instrumentals. But
could we just cycle back a bit to this extraordinary thing where you were getting ready to go out for a drink to either Different Class or This Is Hardcore? Now, I have drank and listened to both those albums, but I will say that the kind of drinking you do when you're listening to Different Class is very different to the kind of drinking you do when you're listening to This Is Hardcore.
I'll tell you a very embarrassing story.
Oh, brilliant. Yes.
There's a nightclub in Sunderland, because I went to University of Sunderland. Big up the Sunderland town, massive. I went to Sunderland Uni, and there was a nightclub there called Independent. We would go every Friday, sometimes a Saturday, me on a Tuesday, because just for first year I would just drink. It was fantastic. But every time I went, we would go straight upstairs, because that was where like Arctic Monkeys was played and Elvis Costello and like that music. And every single night, without fail, we whether it was 11 at night when it was opened or 4 in the morning when it closed, I would always request Disco 2000 by Pulp. And it got to a point where Aaron, the DJ, just knew me as Pulp Guy, because I would always wear the same denim jacket, a Pulp t-shirt, and he would just know that I wanted to do it, because I would get quite drunk and I had my own dance routine to Disco 2000. I would tear it up. Brilliant. For those 4 minutes and a half seconds, I was at bliss. And as soon as it was finished, I was ready to go home, because that was the only song I'm dancing to. I think, what was it? When that lyric where it goes, "Oh, Deborah, do you recall?" I would go like that and then call. I was like, oh, just thinking back to it. But I remember one night, I'd done the Disco 2000 routine. The audience loved it. And I got home and I thought, you know what? not quite tired yet. I had a couple more drinks and I listened to This Is Hardcore.
Yeah.
And just the mood sours immediately. Like when you're sat listening to Help the Aged at 5 a.m, your flatmates are trying to get to sleep. I think that was the same night I got back and I was really thirsty. It's like, oh, you know what would hit the spot after a night of heavy drink? A nice glass of milk. So I had a nice big glass of milk. And I thought, that's quite hit the spot. But do you know what would be better? Another big glass of milk. And I woke up about 2 hours after finishing Hardcore and I threw up into a bin we'd kept on the balcony from when our flatmate had slipped their disc and was throwing up into a bucket constantly. And I remember hearing footsteps and someone had come out onto the balcony to check on me. Or so I thought. It was my flatmate asking me to throw up a little quieter because they were trying to get to sleep and they'd left their window open.
But that could be your lyric on This Is Hardcore, isn't it?
Oh, without a doubt, yeah, because This Is Hardcore is essentially the throw up from Britpop being a massive high.
Yes.
Some of the lyrics on This Is Hardcore are just beautiful. I'm very glad that we brought up Life, Death and Supermarkets because there's a bit in there where Richard Hawley is in a vinyl shop and he's talking about This Is Hardcore. And he says it's essentially one of the best bits of music he's ever heard. And just to have Hawley say that, it feels like a bit more reassuring because it's stunning. It's a beautiful song. I always have like a rotor of pulp songs that like, oh, this is my favorite this week. I think This Is Hardcore's probably got the most claim to that though.
I think This Is Hardcore is a spectacular song. I think in terms of my favorites, like you, I often vacillate, but the two I often land on the most. No, I think there's a trinity. I do think you have to say Common People. I don't think Familiarity has blunted Common People. I think it can be played on the radio as much as anyone likes, and it's still a spectacular song.
It's amazingly not being sort of deflated as Wonderwall has or as Parklife has. It's still managed to. I think it's probably because there's a bit more meaning to Common People than Wonderwall. But
that's one of the things that kind of dispirits me a bit when you hear like songs from what is my childhood on the radio from that Britpop era. You think, God, people were really happy having songs that just weren't about anything at that point, weren't they?
Good old country house, eh?
You just rhyme real with feel. That's it. That's your Britpop starter kit. Yeah.
There's your 4 times platinum selling album, ladies and gentlemen. Enjoy. I've already had enough trouble with Oasis fans when I've said I don't like them. Not them. I mean, like Oasis. I don't hate all Oasis fans. I'm just not a fan of Oasis, but don't say that in public, as I have now.
Oh, I've said it many times, and I'll happily say it again, and I'll say it again and again until, Middlesbrough buskers stop playing Wonderwall.
God. Yeah, it's really like a disease. It truly is. It's like I kind of hate it because of not just because the music isn't that good, but the stereotype it's created, the sort of bucket hat festival going strongbow dark fruits, fucking biblical sort of personality. And it's amazing that's like popular. I don't get it. I like a dark fruit, I do, but not
that wasn't the bit that I thought you objected to the most. That wasn't the problem.
I used to drink dark fruits all the time. I have no qualms with that. I used to.
You don't have to defend yourself against the dark fruits lobby, you, and they're not fucking listening.
Oh, you'd be surprised. They're everywhere these days. Back in my day, we didn't have this problem. Everyone just used to listen to the Hoosiers. Much easier. God. But I think as well, it's got that nostalgia factor now where it's like my generation just missed out on it. We had the Spice Girls and Coldplay, so we were really clamoring for proper music.
Yeah.
And the offset of that was, oh, Oasis, oh, Blur, and then nothing else because digging anywhere past that is too much effort. Like, you're not going to get many people from like my uni course listening to Saint Etienne on the bus home, But
they fucking should.
They should, yeah. I think it's rather telling as well that it's kind of like they listen to the bands Oasis inspired, like Kasabian, like Catfish and the Bottlemen, who are not very good and have the same issues as Oasis. I do think there is comfort to have with familiar music. I just think you can get familiarity from good music.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But mostly I just find the conservatism of Oasis irritating in increasingly in a political sense now with Noel Gallagher, but always in an artistic sense. And I think I've mentioned this before, I think when we did the Spice Girls show, but my parents were of different generations. So I got like I had an older dad, a younger mum, and she had a little brother. So I got like a really broad spectrum of music when I was growing up. And I knew that my dad liked the Beatles and Dusty Springfield, and my mum liked the Teardrop Explodes and the Jam, and my uncle liked Sonic Youth and Pavement. And I thought, this is what music is about. These are these fabulous weirdos creating sort of elaborate fantasy worlds. And then it's my turn, and what we get is 5 ugly blokes in duffel coats, and you just think, what's gone wrong here?
I think it's the standard declined so rapidly, and I don't know how it happened.
Yeah,
I mean, to be fair, I think there's been a bit of a revival for sort of the music coming out now. I look at stuff like Yard Act and Wet Leg and just think that's fantastic.
I love Wet Leg.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Chase Lounge should not work as a song as well as it does, but monumental. I think it's like we're in a bit of a resurgence now because a lot of bands for the past 5 or 6 years were just, if we replicate Oasis or if we do what Ed Sheeran does and just very pop, very oriented in that state of mind, it just got quite dull. And it's ironically, just to link it back, it's the outsider art of music that's coming to the forefront now. Sam Fender, Yard Act, Wet Leg, I'll Black Country New Road, phenomenal.
Even outside of rock music, it's really interesting to me to hear that kind of stuff recreated by people who weren't around for it the first time. Like when I was young, I was an absolute rockist snob. Like it took me ages to get into hip hop, despite hip hop in the 90s being objectively good.
Fantastic, yeah.
So for me, it's really exciting to hear someone like Pink Pantheress, who's based on this kind of like early UK garage, kind of Artful Dodger, Shy Effects kind of style that at the time I would not allow myself to enjoy because I didn't think it was proper music. But now I'm hearing it through the ears of someone raised on it. It clicks, and I really enjoy that.
I think that's the biggest barrier to sort of get over when people are sort of, it's going to sound like I'm a pretentious asshole, but I'm allowed to do that because I'm verified on Twitter. So it's all right. I can get away with it. A lot of, essentially all art has the popularity phase of, for film, it's like Fight Club and The Dark Knight, Inception, No Country for Old Men, that sort of stuff. Really good pieces of film that would hopefully expand someone. It would flicker an interest that says, all right, what's beyond that? Oasis is like that. It's, okay, this is listenable, I enjoy this. What else is there from that period? And it just startles me that not a lot of people have gone, oh, I wonder what this Suede thing is. That's not happened. And I think it's because a lot of Britpop's quite like wildly different. Oasis is not just the most accessible, but the most simple and plain. It's like plain toast. If it's your favorite, then you've got a problem. But every now and then, bit of plain toast, that's all right.
Yeah.
Cure. If you're feeling ill, you may have some Oasis. If not, steer clear.
Yeah, because when Britpop launched, the first music magazine front page had, I think like the big launch one was something like Justine Frischman, Tom York, and Brett Anderson. And of course, Radiohead like put massive clear blue water in between themselves and Britpop immediately. But that was what the music press thought the scene was going to be. And you think, what's the common thread here? Because none of these bands sound anything like each other.
I think it was like a panicked knee-jerk reaction of, oh, there's a lot of British bands that are doing quite well. Into a group they go.
Yeah.
And I think it's like, from reading Good Pop, Bad Pop, it feels like Britpop's a bit of a dirty word. It's like, it's almost as bad as like a swear in a PG film. And I kind of don't blame a lot of artists trying to distance themselves for that. Others have had more success than others, like Damon Albarn essentially reinventing a whole culture of music with Gorillaz, which is monumental. The fact that he can dip in and out of Gorillaz and Blur and then do his own thing as well. He's got such a broad range that it kind of removes him from that great job well done. Jarvis Cocker has gone down the artsy route. of like, here's a French album, which was bloody marvelous. This
It is great, isn't it? The French Dispatch soundtrack. Yeah.
I remember. I was in Hull on holiday, which
Yeah.
is hard to believe, but Hull and holiday never go together. But no hassle
Holiday.
and hessle. Hull. I just had a breakdown. Yeah, I remember it actually released when I was on the train back, so I downloaded it really quickly, and I for the whole 2 hour train trip, just that on loop, beautiful. I used to work at my old uni, and every day I would have to get up at about 5:45 in the morning to get to work, so I would have to take we'd drive to Durham and then 2 trains, and I would always listen to Aline on the train into Newcastle. It just sort of became synonymous with my morning.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of Pulp and Jarvis Cocker songs in general have become synonymous with various important moments in my uni life.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
it's kind of hard to pull it out. You know, I can't listen to Disco 2000 without thinking of like blue pints and falling down the stairs of a nightclub.
Yeah.
And I like it's like I've got a big bundle here and it's just stuck together, and it's like that's just a big block of memories. That
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
really like there's very few albums and artists where I'm like that just conjures up so many memories. And
There's
I think
a
it's nice
particular radio
yeah.
I had, a particular alarm clock radio that Sunrise always reminds me of, because when it was first played on the radio, I was listening to it on that radio.
That's
And
fantastic.
that is how it beds into your life like that.
It's stunning how difficult it is to have a song in bed like that, but how much of it ended up being Pulp.
Yeah, absolutely.
I remember actually I got After You on vinyl, but the Soul Wax edition, because
yeah,
the Rough Trade one, which is I remember it as well only because it doesn't work. It skips about halfway into the verse and just jumps, but I never got rid of it because it became synonymous with uni, and I just kept it.
And the music is to a great degree, intended to do that, isn't it? It's like that bit on I Spy where he's imagining blue plaques for all of the sort of banal kind of coming of age things that he's done in his life. It's so specific that if it clicks with you, it will click with you because you have had a similar experience yourself.
I find myself very lucky that I kind of clicked with Pulp when I did, because I can't be asked to search for more new music. I usually just get it dropped into my inbox now. It's like, oh, can you check out this new album? No. So I got very lucky to sort of find a band that had such range and had a song for every moment, essentially, which was, you know, a real treat to dive into. Because, there's a lot. And I think it's very nice to chart the different phases where it essentially went from this Smith-sounding influence to a bit weird Europop, and then gradually what became the Britpop sound, which is vaguely indefinable.
It is, and it's made particularly weird by having Pulp there. Like without Pulp, you could say, well, Britpop is a guitar-driven fusion of, I guess, kind of. You know, you can hear bits of post-punk with bands like Elastica and Sleeper. You can hear bits of 60s pop, obviously, with Oasis and Blur. That's the kind of palette for most Britpop. But the fact that Pulp had what were at the time a very uncool set of influences. I mean, this was before disco had really been reassessed and seen as being like a major musical movement. And that they were playing this stuff on synthesizers that often sounded like parodically cheap. They weren't like the synthesizers on other 90s records.
It's like an everyday Casio just planted straight on it. It's lovely. It feels very homegrown. I think that's it. It's that homely appeal. Despite it sounding very lavish at times. I always remember I read Truth and Beauty, the story of Pulp, a couple of years ago.
Great book.
Fantastic. I wish I hadn't got rid of my copy, but I had to make a bit of space. But there was a little anecdote about Common People, where it's like it was essentially 50 layers of different instruments and sound effects and everything. And then it was like, well, what's going to piece this together? There's something needed. And then they added an acoustic guitar that you can't hear, but it just pulled it all together. And it's remarkable how many instruments Pulp would use as opposed to how few Oasis would use.
Yes.
That's not even like, that sounds like a knock, but it's not. It's like, I've realized, especially now that I've listened to stuff like Scott Walker and Elvis Costello's 80s output, it's like, I'm really impressed by orchestral type songs. If you've got loads of instruments and you're using them well. I always think of Richard Hawley's Valentine, where it's like, you don't really need the violins and the orchestra behind the chorus, but it's nice that it's there. It's really nice.
It's like when I listen to, I mean, the Beach Boys are an obvious touchstone for this, but when I listen to one of the more straight ahead rocky Beach Boys songs, when I listen to something like Long Promised Road or That's Not Me, and you think, well, this is kind of like rock music, but it's not like rock music where the band's thinking, we've got a guitarist, we've got a bassist, we've got a drummer, let's have them all start at the same time, all end at the same time. That's a song. You know, things drop out depending on whether the song needs it. It's rock music made by people who are used to arranging rather than playing.
Yeah. It's the creativity of tools that are available to everyone, essentially. It's... I don't think Oasis could do what the Velvet Underground did, for instance.
Well, and I also if you say what they did and mean heroin, yes, they could.
Yes, they could.
Other than that,
I'm always thinking back to essentially, which is the core influence of the Beatles was John Lennon and the Beatles. Did I say Beatles twice? Core influence of Oasis was the Beatles. I'm not saying the Beatles were influenced by the Beatles.
That would be quite
phenomenal.
Yeah, there's a Doctor Who episode in that.
Maybe it would have been Ringo's solo albums be a bit better, but
maybe
a man can dream. There is a difference between influence and borderline copyright theft.
Yeah,
influence is Jarvis cock dressing a bit like Elvis Costello and Marky Smith from The Fall. Copyright theft is covering I Am the Walrus and sticking it on as a bonus CD track. And I don't want to devolve into knocking Oasis too much because I could be here for hours. But I think the core differences, I think both you and me are a bit outsider ourselves, and I think that may be why we prefer outsider art as opposed to what's essentially pop.
Yeah. I mean, and it's strange because Jarvis Cocker was always insistent that he wanted Pulp to be a pop band, and he always called them a pop group at a time when other like in British indie bands would have run a mile from those words. But I do know what you mean. It's like after Common People, the next single they put out was Misshapes, and that's a real statement of defiance. That's explaining that they are outside of mainstream culture, that they don't want to fit into the world as it is, let alone
it's the bit at the end where it's the writing on the toilet, and I've got it on a coaster actually, which is the Live On bit, and it's amazing how much Pulp, so like the Live On stuff kind of became a bit synonymous, and if you asked anybody for an image of what Britpop was, there's two that spring to mind, and neither of them have the Gallaghers or Al Bain in it, and it's either Brett Anderson on the front of, I think it was NME, in front of the Union Jack, or Jarvis Cocker doing the Kes pose from which is like, considering they essentially weren't the forefront of Britpop, it's startling that they are sort of the cultural embed of imagery for that period.
And I think part of the reason why sort of they managed to get out with dignity is because around 1997, Britpop became a battle of who can dismantle this thing fastest. You know, this is a bomb that's going to go off. Who's going to defuse it? And Blur got in very early with their self-titled album. Where they'd gone like within a couple of years from making The Great Escape, which is so Britpop, it makes you want to hurl, to making something that has nothing to do with that sound at all.
What's that Blur song on that album on the B-side? Dr. Mango's Quango or something.
Oh, Mr. Robinson's Quango.
Mr.
Yes.
Robinson's Quango. I remember we did that podcast on Blur. The
Yeah.
B side is a very different story to the A side.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was Who Can Dismantle It first. Who dismantled it worse? I don't know. Be Here Now springs to mind.
Well, that was accidental dismantling. They were looking
Yeah.
to keep the party going, and they cleared the room.
It's amazing. It's like thinking Barry White will work at a house party. You stick it on, you hope for the best. Nah. And I think, I mean, even the efforts that were kind of jaded by the overindulgence of the period, like Suede in '99, still had some really good songs to rely on, like Everything Will Flow and She's in Fashion are just fantastic songs.
Asbestos.
Oh, so good. Yeah. It's like even those janky albums were like they're really getting sick of the period. But I think obviously we're on a bloody pulp episode of the podcast, and this is hardcore, like the quintessential breakdown of Britpop.
This is hardcore is the one that is most aware of what it is doing, I think, and not in a way that it is sort of ironic or hedging its bets. It's aware of what it's doing, and that's given it real purpose. It's on the attack.
Yeah. It's that lyric and Party Hard. It's Your Uncle's Psychosis arrived.
Yes.
Fantastic. It's amazing.
Party Hard is incredible. It is so queasy, and the sound on it is just it's so distorted that the distortion stops feeling warm. It's kind of like when people do digital distortion now, when it sounds just slightly off, but they're actually going for it. It's an uncanny valley rock song. It's like a big stadium rock song that's been put together slightly wrong, and it's freaking you out.
I love how Party Hard is dropped essentially in between two of the slowest songs on that album. Yes. Bar TV Movie. It's in the middle of Dishes and Help the Aged, which is the perfect placement for it. But I think I've got the deluxe edition, which has like the failed Bond theme song.
Oh, and, yes.
We Are the Boys. We Are the Boys.
Yeah.
The Professional is phenomenal, because that's just a very clear and obvious takedown, not of the people that listen to Pulp's albums, but the work itself, where it's I only give you what you've come to expect, just another song about single mothers and sex, and that's magical, right? That's
yeah, beautiful. It's a great couplet, and I think that's obviously what's propelled his sort of reassessment and rediscovery now, is the fact that the lyrics are so good, and he can put out a book like Mother, Brother, Lover, which is a collection of footnoted lyrics, which, I mean, if 90% of bands from that era did something like that, you'd want to throw rotten fruits at them.
Oh, God, yeah. I think it's, the only people who can get away with something like that is the people that are essentially lyricists first and essentially performers second. I think of people like Leonard Cohen and Bob Dylan on that level, where it's their lyrics can tell a real story with or without music.
Yeah.
I can't think of many artists that can do that.
I remember around the same time, different generation, obviously, but around the same time, there was a book of Ian Dury's collected lyrics put out, and I would bracket him in the same caliber, really. Yeah.
I think the real interesting difference between Ian Dury and Jarvis Cocker, though, is that it's kind of, you can really chart Ian Dury's influence on stuff like Madness, on stuff like Paul McCartney, especially that cover album they did of all of his best tracks, or best tracks. I've already been down that avenue with that bloody David Bowie one. But I think it's, my friend asked me, it's like, what is the influence of Britpop? And I don't know, because I think it's still too early to figure out what its influence was. Obviously, there's Oasis with their just bastardization of music, essentially. And then you've got Suede with its very art pop roots. I couldn't really tell you who they've influenced, but I don't think it's because they haven't influenced anyone. I think it's because these bands are still preparing themselves for that leap. The most I can think of is Yard Act, which is very Cocker-esque in its jittery lyrics, very, very active, very spoken word almost, which is what Cocker ended up doing on stuff like Sheffield Sex City and what you call it?
Feeling Called Love,
Feeling Called Love.
Seductive
That's the one.
Barry. There's a few of them. Yeah.
There's a real beauty to the spoken word stuff that's like
Mm.
just David's Last Summer and Inside Susan. That's
I think the
mad.
spoken word tracks are one of those aspects of pulp that just gets better with every single album. Like when he starts doing them, he's good at them. But by the time you get to Wicker Man, it's just spectacular.
It's amazing. I think it's one of those bands where there is consistent and real improvement from every album.
Yeah.
And it's very rare that happens. Usually you've got a peak and then a fall. And it's obviously the peak for most people is different class. Wow, what an amazing album. And then, oh, bit shaky there, lads. What's going on there?
Yeah.
And it's not until like 20 years later when people are like, well, actually, that's pretty accurate. What a sentiment that is for the generation that listened to that it becomes sort of full circle of there wasn't really a fall.
Yeah, I mean, the themes on Wheel of Life are so strangely ahead of their time. I mean, we talk about Cocker's fondness for nature writing and his environmental themes, and that starts coming in then. But I remember what rock was like in 2001. No one was writing about that. There was still this stigma that if your song mentions plants, it's hippie shit. That was still the attitude.
I think the closest you could probably get was like Murder on the Dance Floor, and that didn't even have plants in it. That was just good. Which very different to rock at the time, which was like what Linkin Park and Green Day.
Yeah.
The glory days. Kaiser Chiefs, maybe first Foo Fighters album. Oh.
But that's I think it's like I said earlier, it's going to take that new generation to go back to Britpop and not have the sort of the naffness that the phrase came to embody hanging over their heads and rediscover it to make people realize what the promise of this stuff is. I mean, by about the mid 2000s, it's turned a bit now. I think largely by the mid 2000s, I was just desperate for someone to write the lyric like they cared again. And I think that's changed a bit because hip hop has replaced rock as the kind of form around which all pop music orbits. So you can't get away with writing shit lyrics. Like, even if you're not making hip hop music, you have to make something where it's like, if this gets played on the radio straight after the new Kendrick Lamar single,
exactly.
I don't want people to laugh at me,
It's kind of made it a bit awkward for me as well, where it's like I've got to go and cover big rock artists from the 80s and then listen to their new stuff, and it's as empty as their classics were, but nobody really looked at them. Like Bryan Adams was great live, really good fun. All of his lyrics are the same. It's very populist, it's very welcoming, it's very entertaining, but those lyrics mean fuck all. And it's Summer of '69 is a good song, but if you want like lyrical nourishment and food for thought and like just something to think about, you're not going to go to a rock artist, especially not when hip hop's around. Kendrick Lamar, I'm not fond of the fella, but Kanye West, I think Graduation is a superb album. Amazing lyrics on there, and it's like samples of Steely Dan, and like it's phenomenal. And I think it is the lack of competition rock really gave to hip hop. That's why it was replaced. I think it's just a change of pace for people, and I think it's a welcome one. Because if not, then we're stuck with essentially acoustic guitars and singing about Oasis covers, essentially.
Yeah, it's good for people to realize that they're not owed an audience. Sometimes it gives them the right kick up the arse.
I think the very last like dregs of that rock indie scene that have managed to filter through are people like Ed Sheeran. Very 8 cheesy singles, please, lovely. Fine, that's fine. Like, there is always going to be a market for very light pop, and I think Ed Sheeran fits that bill perfectly.
But there is always a market for great pop, which I think is where we came in, is it not? With Jarvis,
It is indeed, yeah.
But yes, that's been your lot from Pop Screen for this week. If you liked what you heard, we do a Patreon where you can get a monthly bonus episode as well as full access to our other movie show, Directors Uncut, my Doctor Who reviews, and much, much more besides. That's at www.patreon.com/The Geek Show. But until next week, I've been Graham.
I've been Ewan.
And we'll see you later.